Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 42nd episode of the Writ Podcast. The Ontario election is off and running, and voters will be going to the polls on June 2nd. So to help set us all up for the next few weeks of campaigning, I'm joined by David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data, and Sabrina Nanji of Queen's Park Observer. Hi, Sabrina and David.
Eric, how you doing?
So let's go through each of the parties. That's how I wanted to structure this discussion. We'll start with each of the parties, kind of what they need to do in this campaign, what their strategies are. And we'll start with, of course, the incumbent government, Doug Ford's PCs. David, you've done polling in a lot of different election campaigns now. As an incumbent government, how do you think the PCs stack up against some of the other ones you've seen in the past?
I think they're in a pretty good place. There's a few metrics I look at. What's the desire for change in the province? That's kind of the most important from an incumbent perspective, which in Ontario today is far lower than it was in 2018 when Kathleen Wynne was defeated, and is about in line with what we saw federally in the last federal election. And so there is a sizable group who want to see the premier and the PCs removed, but not sufficient. And it's almost like when we follow up and say, well, what kind of change do you want? Even a third of those who want to see, definitely want change, say not much change from where we've gone. So they just don't like maybe the people running the government, and the policy direction hasn't been that offensive to them. So desire for change. And then, how people feel about the premier himself, the leader. Doug Ford's, positives have improved markedly over the last number of months. More people view him positively than negatively. In our polling anyways, it's the only leader who has that. And so if I just look at those two, the PCs are in a good place. The last point I'll make is the issue set. Top cost of living is, by far the top issue. And I think it's an issue that plays well for the Tories.
Sabrina, so if there doesn't seem to be a huge desire for change just yet, what is the PC strategy here, at least from what you've seen? Is it about being on the defense or going on the attack?
I guess it depends on how you're viewing it, but I'm on the same page as David. This is theirs to lose. I think the recent string of polls are basically putting them on track to win a second mandate. I think the bigger question might be whether that's a majority or a minority government. And we can kind of see that a little bit in how the Ford government's already campaigning in these early days. Day one when the writ was drawn up, they were in Brampton, the 905, a lot of seats up for grabs there that can make or break you in terms of majority or minority. He was pumping up the 413. We still don't have a lot of details on the costing of that. But again, I don't know if voters are really paying attention to the fine print of it when you've got the premier up there saying he can save you some time on your commute. I'm sure that's going to win them some votes. And then, I think also we'll talk about the opposition parties, but it's kind of putting them in a bit of a tougher place. Like the Ford government isn't really rocking the boat right now. The budget that came out last week, which is standing as their re-election platform because there wasn't enough time to pass it in the House, there were no big surprises in there. Maybe a tax cut for folks earning up to 50K, which had already kind of leaked out the night before anyway. So I think it's more the message, the underlying message that they're trying to send out is, let's not rock the boat. We're coming out of a pandemic, even though no one's really talking much about the pandemic, none of the political parties. And maybe that's a bit of a mistake on the opposition side, who have had trouble getting their messages out during the pandemic, trying to capitalize on some of the Ford government's mistakes. And now the challenge for them is going to be reminding them of, some of the mishandling of that file, especially, long-term care, when the premier promised to put an iron ring around that sector. And, we saw how devastated it was. So I think David's right. Affordability is the top issue, and that plays well to the so-called small c conservative brand. And, whether that's anything from housing to, saving some money on the gas tax, which, is temporary. We need to give them another mandate for that one. A lot of caveats there, but I think that generally speaking, they're feeling pretty good.
Sabrina mentioned some of those issues, that they're trying to address with tax cuts and affordability, a highway that'll help with commuters and saving time and cost. David, these issues, they work well for the PCs.
We do. And, we'll talk about Del Duca's $1 transit promise, which speaks to a very specific group. But Doug Ford's speaking to a completely other group who need their car to get to work, who can't maybe always work from home, which post-pandemic is really divided the electorate, I think, more. So there's more niche groups. As I think the PCs put it, they're the government for the people who shower in the evening or after work, not before work. And that I think has been a very effective message. The other thing I'll say about the PCs is, at least initially, they're not running a defensive campaign, right? You don't get the sense that they are on defense, defending themselves from deep, criticisms of their handling of the government broadly over the last 4 years. Even though if we, rewind back to the 2019, Doug Ford was the most unpopular premier in the country. We regularly had, 60+% of Ontarians saying they had a negative view of him and disapproved of the government. That's not the place they're in today. I think today most people are generally satisfied with the approach the government's taken, and it's because they, as I think Sabrina put it perfectly, haven't rocked the boat. They've meant to just be effective and connect with people in those communities, suburbs, rural parts of the province, and in some parts of the larger cities who just want to get on with it. And I think a positive message of, just get it done fits perfectly with the Premier's brand and what the PCs have done over the last few years.
Sabrina, how do you think Doug Ford fits as a incumbent defending a record versus, 2018 when he was a challenger in an election where people wanted change? Like, how does he fit into that role? Do you think it's a good role for him in terms of his comfort level?
Well, I think Doug Ford has said it himself, that he's always in campaign mode. He's jumping from one to the next. And, just at his rally this week, I'm already losing concept of time in campaign mode, but just at his rally, he was raising the specter of Kathleen Wynne. And there were that elicited the loudest boos from the PC friendly crowd there. So, they are very much not so much on the defensive as maybe they were in 2018, just criticizing the then liberal rulers about, their spending. And now Doug Ford is pumping himself up as a big spender, someone who says yes to these projects. So what a difference 4 years and a pandemic has made for him. But they are attacking their rivals too. And I think that the message is a little clearer. Today we saw an attack ad against Andrea Horwath when we've sort of seen them, focus their aim on the Liberal leader, Stephen Del Duca, who's kind of now in the polls overtaking the NDP as, on track to form official opposition. I think that probably speaks to a strong Liberal brand still in Ontario. But now they're gunning for Andrea Horwath and the NDP. And, a lot of Liberals are saying they think that's smart because it probably will put the spotlight on her a little bit more. And of course, their line is that, she'll be a disaster for the province. She's not ready to govern, those old adages that we've heard about the NDP, even at the federal level. So they are playing defense to some point as well. But I think that their message is kind of coming across a little more clearly than the other parties. Like Andrea Horwath and the NDP have been a bit more reactive. Their messages have kind of fallen flat, I think, with voters. And there's a lot of similarities with the Liberals in terms of their policies that they're putting out there. And so it'll be interesting to see, what happens with Andrea Horwath. This is her fourth kick at the can as NDP leader, and what this means for her fate if she potentially loses official opposition. If the grassroots will want to keep her around. There's already buzz about potential replacements. Some high-profile folks like Kristen Wong-Tam running in Toronto, and Marit Stiles, who's always sort of punching above her weight as education critic. So I think that for them, they're getting their message across a little more clearer. Like Del Duca has been really good at, grabbing headlines of the day. But again, we don't have a full platform, not even a fully costed platform from either of the leading opposition parties right now. So campaigns matter, and it's still early days. So I guess we'll see how it all shakes out.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the NDP then, because they are third place in the polls, and they've been in third place for a little bit of time, really since 2018. There's been very few moments when they were clearly in second, when they were challenging the PCs. David, why do you think that the NDP hasn't been able to sustain the support that they had in the 2018 election?
I think there's two factors. One is Kathleen Wynne is no longer premier, and that anchor that pulled the Liberal Party down is gone. So, in the absence of someone that many progressives even just disliked or just thought it was time for a change, is no longer there. So that contrast is gone. Two, she was opposition leader during a pandemic where she got very little opportunity, I think. Ontario politics, although Sabrina covers it very well and deeply, often doesn't get as much attention in Ontario as provincial elections in other provinces do. We seemingly only turn on when we have to, for whatever reason. And I don't think she's found the purpose for the New Democrats. Like what makes them relevant today? I think there's lots of issues that could have made them relevant. I think healthcare, long-term care, education, these are all things that people signal to us they're worried about. It's not the top issue, but it's the areas where the premier and the PCs haven't performed very well in people's minds. Despite that, they haven't gained any traction. So I think it's the perennial challenge for the New Democrats is how do we remain and how do we make ourselves relevant in an environment where the natural place for Ontarians is to start either on Team Blue or Team Red. And that is always the fight for New Democrats in Ontario, whether federal or provincial politics.
Well, David, Andrea Horwath has been the leader for 13 years. And, you did some polling last month. And, her numbers in terms of name recognition are certainly better than Stephen Del Duca or Mike Schreiner, but they seem still pretty low. What do you make of the fact that it's been nearly a decade and a half, and you still have a big proportion of Ontarians who either say they don't know her, or if they say they know her, they just have a vague notion of who she is?
Yeah, I think it's just her inability to break through and remain relevant to people in their lives, right? She campaigned very well last time. She started that campaign very similar place, not that well known, not well defined, but because people were looking for an alternative to Kathleen Wynne, who they agreed with on key issues, she easily fit that. And so people then gravitated to her. Whereas today, fewer people think the NDP has a chance of winning this election than the Liberals. So she's not seen as the natural alternative to Doug Ford, even though she is the opposition leader. And, I get the sense that people don't really know her. Like they don't at a deeper level know what makes her tick or what she's passionate about or what her purpose is. And 14 years, you should have been able to do that, I guess is my answer. And so Del Duca, we understand why people don't know him. He's new, they didn't have official party status, but I'm not sure there's a good excuse for Ms. Horwath being in the position she is as this campaign starts.
Sabrina, we've heard some language from the NDP that, they finished first or second in 100 ridings, that they're only 10 seats short of government. It seems to be, to me, putting the cart before the horse a little bit to already assume you already have the 40 seats in the bag. For the New Democrats, from what you've seen and the discussions you've had, are they playing defense in the 40 seats that they have? Are they trying to hold them before they're even thinking about making gains?
Yeah, and I mean, even it's not even really 40. It's 38, right? Because Paul Miller and Kevin Yard, Brampton and Hamilton reps were booted or crossed
Or lost their nomination.
Controversial circumstances. But you're right, and that's kind of like their strategy as like campaign director Michael Balagas had told us reporters is that they're going to be pushing really hard in ridings that they want to pick up that they don't already hold. And so I think it's certainly raising questions of if that's a good strategy. But I think they feel very confident right now. They've got a major cash arsenal. They've after getting official opposition in the last round. They've been able to fundraise more than they have in the past. And to David's point, they're kind of focusing their campaign on Andrea. It's all about Andrea. They're going to be pumping her up. But again, I guess we don't know if that's really the best strategy there. I guess if I was advising them, something that they've kind of been trying to do is highlight, the people that are being left behind by the Ford government. And, maybe that will kind of differentiate themselves a little bit from the Liberals too. There wasn't much mention of autism in the PC's budget / re-election platform. That's always a political hot potato. Doug Ford hasn't said that he's going to do much to raise ODSP, the disability rates. And that one is, less than $1,200 a month. What does that even really get you here? So I think that's kind of maybe where they can play it. But it almost seemed like Andrea was maybe talking about strategic voting a little bit, which you're right, it's early days for that. There was a bit of drama in 2018 with, the Liberals saying the NDP will just be worse almost than the Conservatives, or maybe, kind of suggesting that idea when she says that we came in first or second in 100 out of 124 ridings. But again, that was, change election. We kind of all were expecting the Liberals to get trounced, and they did. But clearly, like, the Liberal brand is still going strong. So right now, yeah, the more compelling race is the one for second place, I think.
Yeah, and it was 4 years ago as well. But yeah, David, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you look at our most recent survey, we asked people at the end, regardless of who you support now, which political party do you most identify with? The Progressive Conservatives are at 29, the Liberals at 26, and the NDP at 17. So again, we always have to remind ourselves, Ontario is not a natural place for New Democrats to perform very well. When they do break through, say 2011 federally, 2018 provincially, 1990, I was 9 when Bob Rae won. Those were exceptional elections, not the norm. And so for the New Democrats, I think they have to put Andrea Horwath as their lead, because again, people's instinct isn't to vote NDP. They need to be given a reason beyond. 2018 was, a lot of Liberals said, I'm just not voting for Kathleen Wynne this time. It's just time for a change. That factor's gone. And so they need something else.
It's a little bit like the 2015 federal election campaign. We heard the same kind of language from the NDP. And you're right. If it's not the natural home, I think it's a lot more risky to take it for granted that the votes that you had last time are still with you. There has to be work put into that. And when you're looking at where the polls are now, that's showing exactly that, the NDP being in third. So let's move on to the Liberals. They are coming from 7 seats, worst result in the history of the party. It wasn't just a bad result, it was a catastrophic one. Sabrina, the Liberals are, they've making some big swings in terms of policy proposals. They put some big things on the table to try to get some attention. What's their strategy to try to move from 7 seats to official opposition status, maybe 30, and maybe government with 50 plus? What's their overall goal here? Do they think that the votes that they have right now in the polls are going to stick with them for the rest of this campaign?
Well, I'm waiting to see the full platform, and I know it's still early days yet, but we've kind of got, I think it's a little rare that we've gotten the other parties' platforms, so early in the campaign. And of course, the Liberals have been putting stuff out piecemeal. They're good at grabbing headlines of the day, but in terms of a lasting message, I don't know if we've really got that yet. Their campaign slogan is "The choice is yours," which is kind of like a duh statement.
Seems passive aggressive to me. It's very like, you want to make a bad choice, go ahead, but the choice is yours. I don't know. There's something weird about it to me.
Yeah, but they're trying to define Del Duca, right? And there's already been attacks against him. He's got a lot of political baggage. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before, that he put go stations in his own riding when against expert advice, got called out by the Auditor General for that. He tried to skirt local rules to get a pool in his backyard. And now we're constantly seeing the NDP and the PCs, tie him to the Wynne era, some of those unpopular decisions like partially privatizing Hydro One, that type of thing. So it's interesting to see how the Liberals have responded to that now that we're actually in the campaign period. They're putting out some ads trying to define Del Duca, not much mention of his political opponents. But, there was a couple of spots this week, showing him cooking with his family, cracking dad jokes, just trying to paint him as like an everyman, which is kind of like Doug Ford's bit too, for the people, if I can revive that one. And so I think that they're trying to paint themselves as the best alternative to the Ford conservatives. They are painting Doug Ford as someone who is incompetent. I think they keep reminding people about some of the pandemic era mistakes that the Ford government was making. Stop the circus is another line that they have out there. And so they're also painting Andrea Horwath as someone who's gunning for official opposition again, saying that her and the NDP are attacking the Liberals just as much as they're attacking the Conservatives. And so she's playing for second place, whereas Del Duca is playing for government. Of course, it's like a huge feat to go from 7 seats to official opposition, even government. And so we'll see if they can do that. But there's a lot of close races in the GTA, and that's obviously a seat-rich area. And so I think we'll see him, pounding the pavement there a little bit more. I think even his own seat in Vaughan Woodbridge might be a bit of a close race as well. We've got a minister, Michael Tobolo, there representing it. So I think for them, it's going to come down to the regional races as well.
David, how real is the Liberal support?
It's a good question. I think it's hard to gauge, how firm it is. I think it's there. Again, I think more, as I said earlier, more people self-identify as Liberal than New Democrat. They're close with the Progressive Conservatives. The federal Liberals have consistently done well over the last 3 elections in Ontario. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And what I think's happened, at least at the start of this campaign, is things have reset back to, where they would probably be normally, with the exception that Doug Ford's polling better than what conservative politicians typically perform, I think because of his own personal brand and his ability to expand the tent. But, keep in mind, the federal Liberals won the popular vote in Ontario. But among those who voted federal Liberal, only 2/3 say they'd vote Ontario Liberal today. So about equal numbers are kind of splitting, one to the New Democrats and one to the Progressive Conservatives. So, and having the Prime Minister, beside the Premier, the PC Premier, at an event the day before the election's called, isn't helping consolidate that Liberal vote. So I think the Liberals, there's certainly the opportunity. People have not shut the door to voting Liberal this time, and their inclination is to do that. What this campaign needs to do is ratchet up the desire for change and remind Liberal-oriented voters, and maybe some other New Democrats, that if you want to see Doug Ford defeated, we're your best choice. It's the normal Liberal playbook. The only difference is, in 2015, when they accomplished this federally, they had Justin Trudeau as leader. Stephen Del Duca does not have the name recognition, the charisma, or the connection with voters that Justin Trudeau did. So it's in a way an impressive place that they're already in second, and in some polls earlier, although I think the gap is growing. We're only 4 or 5 points away. That in itself would be a success if that's how this campaign ends.
You mentioned, David, trying to activate Liberal voters and NDP voters. Can they pull votes away from the PCs, or are they more or less in the same playbook as the Trudeau Liberals, that it's primarily on the center left?
Well, I think there are some federal Liberals right now that would go vote PC. And so I don't think I think we have to, as much as we love talking left, right, I don't think that's really what this is. This is about, particularly voters in the GTHA, because I think you have to extend that now. People who would normally be normal suburban voters, I think you can include even like Peterborough and Orangeville into kind of that world again. They're looking at this much more less partisan and more on issues and the kind of approach they want from government. The other thing is, campaigns are all about issue salience. It's like, what's the most important issue? And then voters are often going to make a judgment on that sometimes say it's the ballot question. In the last federal election, the federal Liberals effectively made, for many voters in the suburban parts of this province, focus on guns, focus on crime, focus on issues they were strong on, and the Conservatives were weak. I think the big thing the Liberals need to do is to, as best they can, remind voters what the first 2 years of Doug Ford were like, and maybe even for those that remember what Mike Harris was like, because that's the only way, that's the Achilles heel of Conservatives in Ontario, is this fear of cuts to healthcare, cuts to education. The Tories have effectively, maybe not the best term, inoculate themselves from that in the last few years and in this most recent budget, but that fear is always there. And if they're able to sort of wedge that open, that becomes the thing that I think brings some of those traditionally Liberal voters back into the Liberal tent.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an Ontario campaign unless you're campaigning against Mike Harris, Bob Rae, or Dalton McGuinty, some other leader that was active in the 1990s. So let's move on to the Greens. Sabrina, Mike Schreiner has a seat, so now he will be at the debates. He'll be at the Northern debate next week. He'll be at the main debate later on. How serious are they taking the possibility of increasing their hold?
I think very seriously. I think they're very happy about the last 4 years. I think us in the media, even like we're always saying Mike Schreiner punches above his weight. He's a very effective opposition critic, especially just being the sole Green MPP there. So I think what they're going to do is pool their resources, which was kind of their strategy in 2018 too. Pooling a bunch of their their money, their volunteers in Guelph, which is where Mike Schreiner represents, in order to win that seat, and it worked for them. Obviously, the previous rep was a Liberal, change election, as we say, so that was a factor as well. But I think that just Mike Schreiner's tour, his campaign launch just kind of shows you where they're gunning for. I thought it was actually kind of cute, just as an aside, that he had an electric vehicle convoy, unlike the Yes Express big bus or the unnicknamed NDP bus that the other parties are running. The Liberals have a van. It's not a minivan. That was the joke of, their caucus could fit a minivan, and the Conservatives called them the minivan party. But Schreiner has an EV convoy this week, and he was in Toronto, University Rosedale, which is where Diane Sachs is running, the former environmental watchdog, very high profile candidate for them. Of course, it's a represented by the NDP, but a Liberal bastion, previously. So it'll still be a tough race, but definitely more competitive with Sachs there. They were in Beaches East York, and then Dufferin-Caledon, which is a spot that's environmentally sensitive, and there's a lot of proposals to weaken that a little bit, let's say. So I think we're going to see more of that. I think they're also going to be pushing hard in Kitchener, which in September elected Ontario's first Green MP. So I think for them, they're picking and choosing their races, and they're definitely trying to grow their caucus of one. And if you talk to them, they're feeling very confident about it. I think certainly having Mike Schreiner on the debate stages over the next 2 weeks will be a big leg up for them too.
David, do you see opportunities for them?
I see some. I mean, it's probably the hardest job right now is to make the Greens a viable option for people. 30% say they're open to voting Greens. So there's, it's the smallest of the four largest parties, but not insignificant. Now, how do you convert that potential is usually none of the above are good enough. So I'm going to kind of protest vote or give my vote to the Greens. Two, environmental or climate change issues have to be salient, and they're not as salient in this election as we've seen federally or even provincially in the past. And so that's Mike, and he's not known despite being in the House. So I think those are the big challenges for the Greens. And I think their strategy of finding a good candidate and running in a race and putting all their resources there has worked well in the past. And I suspect, that's their best strategy. This is not going to be a green wave election. This is not going to, because, we'll be surprised if, climate change is discussed much at all, because Doug Ford doesn't want to talk about it. And I'm not certain the other opposition party leaders want to, because it's not going to be the thing that defines how a lot of people are voting this time.
And we'll close off with some of the smaller parties, the Ontario Party, the New Blues, seeming to try to replicate some of Bernier's success. David, do you think they have the potential to have any impact on this?
I think around the edges, maybe. I think if this race gets closer and Doug Ford is, and the PCs are competing strongly with, say, the Liberals in some GTA ridings, and the New Blue Party takes 1 or 2 points, that could be definitive. I just don't get the sense that it's going to matter all that much. I mean, last time you had, although the Trillium Party, I guess, didn't run many candidates elsewhere, but you had other kind of parties on the right trying to eat into the PCs. I don't get the sense that there's a lot of unhappiness among kind of movement conservatives with Doug Ford. I suspect they're not thrilled with some of the choices he's made, and that budget being the biggest spending budget in Ontario history doesn't align nicely with a conservative ideology normally, but they would much rather have Doug Ford win again than any of the other two, and that's going to probably keep the coalition together.
Yeah. Sabrina, do you hear any concern from the PCs about these other parties?
Not much. I mean, they're not sweating it. I think maybe Cambridge, just because Belinda Carahelios, one of the New Blue founders, Tory spin-off parties, she's the incumbent there. I think it's impressive, for the New Blue Party, regardless of what you think about their politics or policies, that they've been able to, run a full slate of 124 candidates. That's impressive for any political startup. But also, like to David's point, a lot of these spin-offs came about because people were unhappy with the pandemic rules and restrictions. Things are lifting right now. The weather's getting better. So obviously, if things get worse, that could be a curveball in all of this, but it doesn't really leave much of a soapbox for these parties to stand on right now.
Yeah. And I mean, we'll see if Max Bernier ventures onto the campaign trail at all. There's, don't underestimate that deep-seated anger, but we're not talking about it anymore. There's no more restrictions. And so their purpose is not as clear. I think that's a good point, Sabrina.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's going to be lots more to discuss over the campaign. So I look forward to speaking to both of you again. So have a good election campaign, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
Thanks to David Coletto, CEO of Abacus Data, and Sabrina Nanji of Queen's Park Observer. And you can check out her newsletter at qpobserver.com. So that'll be it for this episode of the Writ Podcast. If you do like it, I hope that you'll subscribe to this channel and like this video and share it. And if you want to get some bonus content, I am putting out some extra Ontario election-focused podcast episodes through the Writ.ca. It's for subscribers only, so if you would like to get access to those episodes, you'd have to go to the Writ.ca and subscribe. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.